Hello, everyone. I am very excited for this. We're joined by Arthur Mensch, who was originally in academia, but was rescued from academia and joined the ranks of the Working Society, and then worked at DeepMind as a researcher. That was where you led the chinchilla paper, correct?
Yeah, that was one of the main authors.
This very foundational paper in AI. And now is the co-founder of Mistral. Everyone here knows, who here knows what Mistral is? Okay, good. And the other people were lost and wandered into AI Day by mistake. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the basics here, but I'm super excited to jump right in to the important questions, like why the name Mistral?
So Mistral is a French wind, and it has two vowels, which are I and A. And INA is ER in French, and I think everybody here knows what that means.
And you know, you released this kind of technical paper, described you know, what you think Mistral's market opportunity is, or maybe what you think everyone else is doing wrong. And some of these were, you know, you think it's very important for there to be a European AI lab. You know, you think everyone else is underrating open source. You know, how would you describe what you think the most important differentiators are for Mistral today?
I guess our larger differentiator is that we take a different approach to technology. Most of the, like Does presented some demonstration around GPT-4 and Cloud 2. Those are very proprietary models. You don't know anything about them. Everything happens behind a black box API. What we want to promote is an open approach to models. We want to create models and release their weights. We want to have a family of models which is open source, and we want it to be the best of the open source models. We are also developing a proprietary family of models and some hosting solutions, but really we want to be an open core LLM provider, and this is quite differentiating compared to the big US actors that are currently in the space.
Obviously, the notable exception to the US providers, you know, you look at Google, which has, you know, its successful closed source Bard and OpenAI, but Meta released Llama 2. And so does that change anything there, or how do you view the Meta releases?
So we view it as a strong opportunity. The good thing about models is that once you have access to a model, you can retrain it. You can reuse the compute that has been spent on the model itself to actually build something better. And that's really where the open source community play is important. We are about to release some models that we hope that the community will take and make better. So improve them on the controllability side, fine-tune them for specific purposes. Really, we think that by giving to the community, you can take from the community, and we're lucky that Meta also thinks the same, and we believe that there will be some very interesting synergies to be built in the coming years.
I find it very exciting seeing all the open source progress. And by the way, we will have time for questions at the end. So if you're thinking of questions, we will get to them shortly. I asked the person I was with just before this what questions I should ask you, and they said, when do we get to use the Mistral product?
So you will have to wait a couple of days more because we have something coming.
But only a couple of days?
Yeah, it will be. We have something cooking for in a couple of days. Yes, it's only a small model, but it's a very good small model.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, I won't say more, but it's something interesting coming.
Okay, you heard it here. You described the importance of open source models in your paper, in your materials. You also described the importance of AI safety. Yep. How do you square those two?
So it's a very good question. We think that the benefits of providing open source models to the community are great for safety, because if you have access to weights of the model, you can tweak it to do a moderation model, for instance, which counteracts, I think, the biggest bad usage of generative AI today, which is production of misinformation. And if you do censor the model heavily behind proprietary API, this is not something you can do because you're blocking any kind of content that you may want to moderate. So there's safety is I think empowered from open source.
So you think basically the most important thing is to be able to understand what the model is doing, and then you can encode whatever policy or content goals you have, but it's very bad if that's happening in a closed source way.
Well, I don't know if it's bad, but I think it's important to understand that a strong model should be able to process bad content, hateful content, because it needs to understand that it's bad, that it's hateful. And if it understands that, then you can control it to block it for end users' applications. And so you do need to have access to the underlying weights to do that. And I think this is quite, there's a strong misunderstanding, I think, on safety. What we really want from models is for them to be controllable. And you want the downstream users, the users that create some applications, to take this model and control them in what, and control them into an end user application. And so if it's moderation, for instance, you need to start from a model which isn't censored from the beginning. If it's a chatbot, you do want to impose some guardrails, but to impose guardrails, it's much better if you have access to the weights than if you are just playing with text and closed source APIs.
What is your view on how we solve hallucination? Because it feels like Stripe uses LLMs, and you saw one of the demos earlier. Stripe uses and is kind of rolling out more uses of LLMs in lots of parts of the product, but it feels like one of the main inhibitors to serious business applications is the fact that they just sometimes make stuff up.
Yeah, so I think there's several things in which you can reduce these hallucinations. The first thing is you need to train the models for a long time. You need to cram some knowledge in them, and that's what we've been doing.
And this is important, right? Because this is one of the places that you differentiate against the other people producing models, is the amount of training.
Yeah, exactly. The amount of training you put on a certain size of model. So this is one of the things you can do. I think one thing that Dust is doing very well as well is to use retrieval augmentation, so a way of getting some knowledge, putting it in the prompt of the model, and then fine-tuning the model or modifying it so that its only goal is to follow the context it has to answer a question. And this is something that is made easier if you can fine-tune the model to actually follow the context it sees to answer questions. If you only use a ready-made model, it's slightly harder. So we think that hallucinations is also something that open models will promote. For this, you need two kinds of models. It's quite interesting. You need generative models, but you also need an embedding model, so a model that takes some text and basically produce an embedding, so some floating point representation of it. And this is something that we will also provide very soon.
It seems like France is having very much an AI renaissance at the moment. Why?
Yeah, this is very true, and this is very exciting for us as a company and to be in such an ecosystem. I think this is the result of several factors. One of them is the French the French system of education, which promotes mathematics and computer science quite a lot. And as it turns out, these are the two competencies that are very important to make models work. So this is one of the reasons, and I think it also goes with like the general renaissance of the French tech ecosystem. So the two things are now connecting with each other, and I expect to see a lot of interesting things in generative AI in France.
What do you think we need now to further promote the ecosystem? Obviously, there's a lot of energy, as you say, the French technical kind of talent and quality of education has always been very good, but it feels like it's now being unleashed in the startup scene. The capital is much better. And so if you were encouraging the VCs and policymakers and founders now, what would you like to see happen from here?
I think we need boldness. So the capital is good. It could be better. There's really a lot of opportunities to found some new AI companies with very interesting ideas, and I encourage all of the VCs in the room to take another look. I also think we need some control on the regulation that is going to happen in Europe. There will be some differentiated rules in between Europe and the US. They shouldn't be too differentiated if Europe want to play a role. So this is something that we are actively discussing. And what else? I guess these two things are would already make quite a difference.
Yeah, I'm curious on the regulation. So can you give us an example of a good rule that you think we should have for AI, and also a bad rule that you think we should not have, but might end up with?
Yeah. So a good rule would be to say that models should be well documented, that they should be auditable, so you could have access to the weights, be able to explore them in depth and without restriction. This is one good rule.
All models, even a model Stripe trains internally and only uses for, or only a model that's released to the public?
So documentation in our mind should be proportional to the user base. If it's internal, you don't need to document it too much. If you give it to many people, you should document it more. A bad rule is a rule that is based on some hard threshold. So let's say your model is above a certain performance on a certain benchmark, it should be heavily regulated. This is in our mind.
Which is the rule being discussed in the United States, I think, or maybe also here?
Yeah, any kind of method rule where you have numbers, you have this amount of compute makes you a frontier model and you should be regulated. This capacity makes you a frontier model and you should be regulated. We don't think that this is a proper way of accompanying the growth of the technology.
People love to talk about, artificial general intelligence, and that was kind of central to the founding mission of many of the foundational model companies. I don't think I saw mention of it in your strategy memo. Should I read something into that?
The thing with artificial general intelligence is that it's an ill-defined goal.
I think so, I'm glad to hear someone saying it.
So you have many people talking about it, but meaning different things, and so we don't want to go into that semantic trap of talking about things that are ill-defined. What we really want to make are models that can be adapted to the enterprise's use case to make everybody's life easier. We don't believe in existential risk in the fact that the model is going to go berserk because it becomes too intelligent. I mean, if you look at it, even like the best models still have huge limitations, and these limitations need research, and research should be done by companies like ours.
That makes a lot of sense. So you don't think that much in terms of Mistral producing AI that can get to artificial general intelligence? Because you think that's just not a well-specified question?
Yeah, I think we want Mistral to produce. We are producing models that will empower people to work better, to work faster, to focus on the most important things. But really, generative AI should be thought about as a tool that just makes us superhuman in a sense. But it's never going to be an independent, active, berserk Terminator.
You laid out, you also heard it here first. You laid out in your, what do you call it, your strategy paper or your launch paper?
It's a leaked strategic memo destined to our seed investors.
Oh, it was leaked? I assumed it was released.
It was leaked, but...
Well, I'm sorry. I feel now that I'm kind of rooting around your underwear drawer.
You know how that goes.
Okay.
No, but we'll have more material defining our strategy coming
Well, I look forward to reading that also. Yeah. Anyway, you lay out in that you would like to have the best technology within 4 years. You lay out some of these milestones. The best open source model within by Q2 next year. Are we still on track for that?
We are very much on track with that. We're starting with basically models are on a cost performance curve, and the higher it costs, the best performance you get. And we are going to go from left to right on this curve. So starting with small models, and we are currently training much bigger models too.
And are the small models targeted at on-device usage?
It can be on device. It's a bit ambitious, but it can run on some.
Okay, small, just for cheaper inference.
It can run on a MacBook Pro pretty well.
Okay. Yeah.
It's an expensive device.
Yes, and then you said within 4 years having the best technology. Again, is that a well-defined goal? Because presumably as the AI space gets bigger, there will be a lot of niches, a lot of subspecialties. And so do you think about the best technology being the best performing text model, or how do you define that?
So it's a very open space. The use cases we are currently discovering, I think we do have a good understanding of the basic use cases like knowledge discovery, marketing, customer assistance. The hard use cases, which is empowering research and development departments, for instance, is still very open. And so I can't tell the future on whether it's going to be one big model that can do everything, or whether we'll need to go into the thing will scatter into niches. But in any case, we are there to make models that are very good in a very big part of the market.
What has surprised you since founding this company?
I was, I guess, surprised at the speed of our employees, because I didn't expect to. We have models that are pretty good at chatting, and I wasn't expecting it for the size of the models we targeted for our first trainings, and so this was a pleasant surprise. I'm still surprised at the speed of the field in general. You see things happening every day, and it's a challenge to stay focused on what we are building, but I think we do a good job at that.
We'll go to audience questions in a second. Do folks have questions? Yes, I see we have. Actually, okay, we'll go to them now. Question from over here.
Quick question. You talk about models running on device versus in the cloud. During the 2010s, a lot of the computing has gone to the cloud, but it feels like maybe it's unsustainable for Gen AI at scale. What's your thought process about that?
So the question was, just for anyone who didn't hear it, how do you think, we've seen in the 2010s everything moving to the cloud, you're talking about on-device. How do you think about the need for on-device or that trend?
I expect that we'll see the two grow, because when you have very large privacy concerns, it can be good to be completely on-device. I think in the current state of the technology, the models that are being used are much too big, but they can be made much smaller for a specific use case. And so as long as you can make a model smaller than a few billion parameters, and you can make it solve your task, then you can deploy on device. And I expect that this will happen sooner than later. The speed of compression is actually faster than what we expected.
There's probably a number of engineers in this audience who do not currently work in AI, but are interested in getting into it. If you're a software engineer curious about becoming good at AI, curious about learning how to dabble in it, where would you encourage people to go? What would you encourage them to do?
So I think it's very good to start with the basics. So current AI is built on deep learning. So if you want to understand what's going on, you should do a little bit of deep learning first.
So train your own
Train your own small model. Try to understand what's going on, how the technology is made, what are the limitations of it. Before going in full prompt engineering mode, you do need to understand the underlying technology behind it. And it seems very easy today because the models are pretty well controllable and you can quickly make an application out of it. But if you want to make a strong and robust application, you do need to understand better the underlying parts.
When I cook, I follow the recipe very closely and weigh everything, and I'm very careful in following the steps. And my girlfriend, who is a much better cook, when she cooks, she just throws everything together and she knows things and she knows what the right flavors are and how long things need. And, yes, you can just skip that step and everything. And it feels like in AI, when you say it's useful to build a small model yourself, a lot of the people who are very good just kind of know things in that same way, and they know how to tune the hyperparameters, and they know that this approach won't work, and they have a lot of intuitions. How do you develop the intuitions to become a better model chef?
So it takes time. I think it's the biggest value in the good AI engineers is to have this intuition of what works, what do not work. How do you make it better? How do you iterate? How do you train a model, look at the performance, decide what you should change in your training setting to make it better? And that's what makes the value of the team that we hired in particular. All of these people, all of our employees built some experience in usually large tech industries where they had access to a lot of compute and they could build their intuitions. So to build intuitions, unfortunately, I think it takes compute. So it's nice if you can get a hand on a couple of GPUs. But that's really important to be able to iterate fast and to understand how the models actually work and how to make them better.
Okay, so start by building a toy model, but there's no substitute for actually running something in production where you need to make the performance better, and you start to develop these intuitions.
Yeah, I mean, you have intuition. You can have intuitions in how do you train a model, how do you orchestrate a model with I don't know, retrieval augmentation, for instance. You can also build a lot of intuition on that, and for this you need to experiment. You need to do A/B testing. You can build intuition on how to make it faster, how to accelerate the inference part. For this, you need to understand very well how the hardware works, because it's very tied to how GPUs are connected, how GPUs use the memory. So you have, in all of these parts, you need to build some intuitive knowledge. And it takes time. It's not going to happen in 2 days. I mean, I know the AI looks a bit like magic, but in order to do robust things and move things into production, you need a little patience.
Makes sense. Sorry, we had a question up here.
Yes, little question. Why do you bet on open source for Gen AI?
So we think it's the best way of being cost efficient and of breaking the barriers that are still there in the proprietary technology. So breaking the problem of hallucinations, making the model smaller, more efficient, making them easier to align. We think that if you look at the history of software, this has always been how it ended up with. So brothers, they were owned by proprietary big technology company. They ended up being open source. Operating systems, the same, and I think the most recent example is cloud orchestration, so Kubernetes, it's open source. Today, we are on the brink of a new revolution, and as always, the big proprietary solutions were the first, and we're very glad they did because they showed the world how generative AI worked. But we think there's so much to be taken from the community, from cost sharing across different actors, that open source is going to prevail, and that's what we are here for.
It also seems it's in response to very strong customer demand, where what everyone wants is better performance and lower cost and kind of less vendor lock-in. And right now, many of the companies are focusing on the first, and no dedicated AI companies, except for Mistral, are focused on the second, of lowering costs and reducing lock-in.
Yeah, it's very true, and based on our customer exploration, we've seen that most businesses are still in the proof of concept phase, so they don't have that much cost, they're not too cost sensitive. When we move into production, when those enterprises decide to deploy to their end users some generative AI solutions, they will need to control the cost, they will need to control the infrastructure, they will need much finer control on the models, they will need to make them smaller and adapted to their use case. And so I think that's where open models are going to have a lot of value.
You had a question.
So you mentioned that your differentiator is that your models can be fine-tuned, you can adjust weights, etc. Do you plan on building some kind of abstraction on top of that, or is your target persona mostly machine learning engineers?
So our MVP has some deployment software on top of it, so you can easily spin up an API internally and have full control over it. We are strengthening our software arm, software as a service arm, to actually propose some customization on specific data flows, and this will happen. But we started with the models because that's what the team was the best at. So we start with very strong models, and progressively we'll build some developer-oriented orchestration stack on top of it.
Over here.
Hi, thanks for the panel. 15 minutes ago, OpenAI announced that ChatGPT accepts images and voice as input and voice as output also. Does Mistral have any plan to go into multimodal models? And open source seems to lag a bit in that field.
So yes, we are focusing on text right now, but I was personally working a lot on multimodal things when I was at DeepMind. So the architecture behind GPT-4 Vision is probably one of the things that I developed. So we will build that. Obviously, we are a very lean team, and so we are focusing on the text first. It's actually the hardest part and the most compute-intensive part, because as Mathieu can testimony, it's actually cheaper to train models on vision than on text. And we will move that eventually, and we are aware that there's a huge gap in the open source world on multimodal models, and that's a gap that we will want to fill at some point.
It also feels like for the industrial use cases that you talked a lot about in your leaked strategy paper, text is a useful encoding layer where a lot of other cognition can be, like I always like the demo of, you can use text to play chess with the AI model where you just say moves in the written notation. And I mean, they're not amazing chess players, but they know the rules and they can play. They play like a kid would play. And so I think this is a good example of text is just our encoding for a lot of other thinking that is happening.
Yeah, that's for sure. You can play chess with these models, but it's not the best architecture.
No, I know, but just like the text is an encoding layer for the cognition.
Yeah, and the way we think about open weights model is that it provides basically a decoder, so it's the text-oriented part. But if you want to do specific workloads that involve images, that involve chess, you probably want to connect them to existing deep learning models. So you should see the decoder part, as long as you have access to the weights, as a gateway to any kind of data workload that you want to run. But putting everything in the single decoder through a text bottleneck is very unlikely to be optimal in the chess part in particular.
Chess shows that very well, where after a certain point they make an illegal move. Okay, you had a question.
Arthur, John, thanks for the panel. My name's DK. I'm building a company called Mark Vision. We are building an AI-powered product that helps companies to remove and enforce counterfeits in the online space. In fact, we're backed by YC, just like you did, John. So my question is for you, John. At YC, we were taught to build products that the customers love. That's the number one, the utmost priority of all startup founders. I was wondering if you could share some of your experiences when you were doing go-to-market, expanding outside the US, when you ran into the struggles and hurdles of meeting that expectation of global customers. That would be really helpful.
I think the biggest thing is just the product it depends on the space. But certainly for us with Stripe, the product we built for the US market was not the right product for the European market. And so as we were expanding to the European market, all the considerations around needing to handle SEPA payments and mandates and VAT and everything like that were all totally different from what American customers want. And so that's why we have engineering here in Europe, and there is a product development cycle that is very important in terms of getting close to your customers, because the first version of a product you ship will probably not be that compelling, and you have to constantly refine it based on what you're hearing from customers to actually make it good. But I think you shouldn't expect to just be able to take the product that you launch in one market and have it succeed in the other market. And again, that's what I found very interesting in your paper, was this notion of kind of a European AI and this very strong kind of European view that this is what European customers would want. I thought it was striking how much that came up in the paper.
Yeah, I think the European angle we have is really very related to the different business model we want to create, which is around open models. Currently, we are seeing on the US side some kind of oligopoly shaping up. You have Google on one side, Microsoft on the other side. They are talking a lot with the White House, a little bit doing regulatory capture. And we think that in Europe, if we don't do something about it in the coming year, we will be too late. And that's why we started Mistral AI. And we started it with our conviction that a different approach to the business was possible, and that an open core business model was actually valid.
And it also feels like a reflection of the fact that people are so aware right now and so hung up on what is happening with data on individual people, and then you have AI come along into this environment that it feels relevant there.
Yeah, I think if you're concerned about data privacy, you should be concerned about sending it sending it without control to a third party. And eventually, especially in production, so for proof of concept, it's okay. I mean, you can, but if you want to move into production, you definitely want to remove this liability at some point.
What is the technical solution to, you have large language models trained on data from around the internet, then you have the GDPR right to be forgotten?
It's a tough question. I think the GDPR wasn't designed with language models in mind. We do our best, but obviously it's statistical things. But we do our best to remove user data from what we find from the data we gather. But it's a tough question, I believe. And one solution is to have a filtering stack, so a way of verifying whether the model is not outputting anything that is user related. And I think it's the most robust way of building things.
That makes sense. More questions? Go to the... okay, we'll go to the back, the center.
Hi. Regarding the new models you're training, are you training from scratch, or are you using an existing model and you are basically training on top of it?
So we are training from scratch. Yeah.
And regarding the architecture, what's your view about GPT-like architecture versus new components, more exotic, that are being now developed and researched?
Decoder-only architecture is pretty strong and very hard to beat if you do know how to train them.
Do you have any different perspective on scraping and how you scrape the internet?
The construction of a data set is, I think, part of our proprietary, very strong asset in our proprietary tech stack.
So there's lots of interesting stuff, but you can't tell us.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's very important to, I mean, on the internet you have mostly garbage. And it's very important to take this garbage and distill it very heavily so that you do get the things that are actually interesting for a model. And this is something that we've been pretty good at doing.
So, yeah, I'm over here. Especially regarding trustworthiness and reliability of generative language models. You've mentioned retrieval-augmented generation. I was wondering if you see any future and perspectives on neuro-symbolic approaches or other approaches incorporating knowledge graphs or some other technology.
No, I'm not sure about that. I think that these kind of exotic approaches are very late to the party, and deep learning basically makes things work, and that's what we are betting on. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm saying that we won't be working on it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Question here at the front.
So in a few days, there's going to be a first release from Mistral. Is that going to be just like an upload to Hugging Face or something, or will there be like an interface? Like, how is it going to look like, or can you just not talk about it?
It will be a surprise.
All right, cool.
Hello, thank you for the panel. I kind of have a more philosophical question. So I would say, how would you define human consciousness? Do you think that humans will ever be capable of creating artificial consciousness? And if not, what do you think is the biggest barrier to that?
You're talking to the wrong person, I think. I'm, I guess, not able to give any interesting insight on that. Like, the question is whether, if the question is whether large language models are conscious, I tend to say that they are not. They are mostly like a soft key value network that is storing knowledge and retrieving it at runtime. The question whether there's some internal world representation in it, I think, is open. Slightly unlikely. There's some very interesting papers that came out this week, on showing that really large language models understand nothing and are mostly about interpolating sentences, which is the way we train them, so it's not that surprising. I think we're pretty far away from an artificial consciousness, if you ask me.
That is the beginning.
It is interesting, though, everyone used to talk about the Turing test, and then we just blew past the, commonly used definition of the Turing test without much commentary on that. Do you have thoughts on what a good new Turing test would be?
Yeah, I think this relates to the remark I did on regulation, that when you have a technology that grows, you need to grow the difficulty of the benchmarks. And obviously, a Turing test is not good enough to measure consciousness, but back in the 70s, it's understandable that one could not have an idea of what could trick the test. Yes. And so that we do need some better benchmarks, and we do need some better benchmarks also to compare the models and the different solutions, because right now you have all of the solutions, all of our competitors that produce things, but it's very hard to actually compare actively what's going on and what solution should be taken. And I really hope that the space is going to be clearer as we grow, as we become more mature.
Got it. I guess you can, we still have a pretty good version of the Turing test. If the AI is inside the box asking to be let out, you just ask it something that happened after its knowledge cut off, and it will give itself away.
Yeah, that's a very good Turing test. But again, this is something you can beat if you put some retrieval augmentation. So
will you guys fix the knowledge cutoff problem?
I mean, it's pretty much fixable if you plug it to the internet. So if you make the model able to query things and then put it in the context and use it, it's not perfect, but it works pretty well. And so it would probably trick your Turing test. You probably want to think of something even harder.
But you could probably tell with the difference in latency.
Yeah, obviously. You can do that.
You could look at the network traffic coming out of the box. Okay. More questions? Sorry, where were the questions coming from? Over here.
Hello. So what's your take on LLMs versus specialized models?
I think LLMs are meant to be specialized to your use case. So as it turns out, you can specialize them on many use cases, and they can solve basic use case without changing the weights, which is good. But if you have a specific thing in mind, then it's always going to be better if you have data, you should put this data in your model in some way in order to make it better or to make it smaller with the same performance. So specialization is indeed needed for many use cases, and especially as we move to production. It's not to say that a model which has been specialized to, 200 tasks is not going to be able to solve these 200 basic tasks. But as long as you have a specific task, and I think most enterprises do have very specific tasks that are outside of the training set, then you should figure out a way of putting this knowledge and the comprehension of the task into the model itself.
Okay, I'll do one more question. The lady all the way at the back.
Thank you for the panel. Why did you decide to do the leap from academia to the industry? And how do you forecast, or how would you like to envision the collaboration of academia and industry in the future?
So I did take the leap at the time when during COVID. So I wanted to not be alone and work with a team. So that's my personal story. I think there's a lot of very good collaboration ways in between the academia and the industry. In particular, on the inference part. So how do you take the model and make it an API? You see many very, very interesting things, interesting software that is very efficient coming from Stanford. And we're working with them to make it better and to integrate it into our own solutions. So on many parts of the stack, and in particular on the non-too costly part, on the part that are not too compute intensive, you have a lot of interesting ideas that come out of the academia, and that's something that we want to foster, and that's something that we also want to give to. So when we give models to everyone, with permissive licenses, we also expect that academia is going to pick it up and to bring new ways of aligning it, of instructing it, of specializing the models.
I think we'll have to leave it there, but I just want to say thank you, Arthur. This is the most exciting technology trend that I think we've had, at least in the time I have been working in technology, and so it's amazing that so much of it is happening here in Paris. We're obviously very excited about it from a product point of view, as you saw in the demos earlier, and lots of the stuff we have going on. It's very exciting to see what you're doing, and I can't wait to see the surprise you have for us later this week. And so when should we be setting our calendars to check in on the internet, just out of curiosity?
The precise day is also a surprise.
Okay. Well, it's a great week for AI, and lots of good surprises.
Thank you, John.